We're back now for our weekly check-in with Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He joins us from Westport, Connecticut. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
You warned us last Sunday that we are entering what could be the hardest part of this pandemic as we get into these colder months. We're seeing these infection and hospitalization rates really jump. Where are we on the trajectory as you see it?
We're at a dangerous tipping point right now. We're entering what's going to be the steep slope of the curve, of the epidemic curve. We know what that looks like from the spring. We know what it looks like from the summer. These cases are going to continue to build. There's really no backstop here. I don't see forceful policy intervention happening anytime soon. We have a moment of opportunity right now to take some forceful steps to try to abate the spread that's underway. But if we don't do that, if we miss this window, this is going to continue to accelerate, and it's going to be more difficult to get under control. Now, in a lot of parts of the country, it doesn't feel really, really bad right now because it's a little bad everywhere. You don't have regions where it's extremely dense in any one region like we did when it was epidemic in New York or epidemic in the South. Outside of states like Wisconsin or Iowa, most states just have a lot of spread, but most states aren't at the point where they're extremely pressed right now. That's going to change over the next 2 to 3 weeks. I think things are going to look much more difficult, and so we need to take some steps right now. There is no public support for shutdowns nationally like we did in the spring. That's not going to happen, so we need to reach for other measures.
Well, you heard the National Security Advisor to the President say the focus on just protecting the vulnerable. The Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, said on CNN, we're not going to get control of the pandemic. So is the point here just buckle up?
Well, I think that's what they're saying, but I don't think that's what we should be doing. There's things that we can do to slow the spread. I mean, a national mask mandate can be put into place. It doesn't need to be backed up with fines or stringent enforcement. We have other requirements that we expect of a civil society that we enforce with, political jawboning leadership. We give people warnings at first. So I think masks are one thing that we could be doing. We need to look at targeted mitigation, starting to close congregate settings where we know spread is happening. Remember, even if we get a vaccine this year, and I'm on the board of Pfizer, one of the companies that's pretty far along in developing a vaccine, even if that becomes available this year, and we get shots into the arms of the first tranche of patients, which is likely to be the elderly and healthcare workers, they're not going to have protective immunity until 2021, at some point in 2021, because it takes time for that vaccine to kick in and you need 2 doses. So this vaccine is not going to affect the contours of what we're going to go through, which is going to play out in the next 2 or 3 months right now.
And the CDC has said that masks are sort of the best plan for the moment. On that point, last week you told us that if someone's going to vote in person, for example, they should have a high-quality mask. You said that meant not a cloth mask. Walk us through what the safest masks are.
Well, remember, the masks serve 2 purposes. One is to protect other people from you. So if you're asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic, if you have a mask on, you're less likely to expel respiratory droplets that can infect other people. The other purpose is to provide you some measure of protection if, in fact, you're around people who are infected. So if you want a mask to afford you some protection from other people, quality matters. A cloth mask may be 10% to 30% protective. A surgical mask, a level 2 or level 3 surgical mask, procedure mask, may be about 60% effective. An N95 mask or an equivalent like a KN95 mask, which is a Chinese equivalent, or what we call an FFP2 mask, which is a European equivalent to an N95, that could be 90–95% protective. So if you want a mask to afford you a level of protection, wear a higher quality mask. If you only can get a cloth mask, thickness matters, and cloth masks with polyester in them and a combination of polyester and cotton do better.
Thank you. At the White House, masks are not mandatory, as we discussed with the National Security Advisor. And we know the Vice President had close contact with staffers who have tested positive. The CDC advises everyday people to isolate, to quarantine if they have that kind of contact. The Vice President is not doing it. Is he putting others at risk by campaigning?
Well, look, he could be closely monitored. So the short answer is yes, but you can closely monitor the vice president. I would understand why they wouldn't want to quarantine the vice president, but they need to be very explicit about what they're doing and the risks that they're taking. He should be wearing a high-quality mask, an N95 mask at all times. He should be distancing wherever possible. They should be serially testing him. And there's ways to try to provide a measure of protection around the vice president or protect other people from the risk that the vice president does contract the infection. But they need to be very explicit about the risk that they're taking. I think everyone right now in the White House should be wearing a mask. They have an obligation to protect the vice president and the president and not introduce virus into that setting. They certainly have access to proper protective equipment, unlike a lot of other essential workers that don't have that kind of access. They have access to serial testing as well. Finally, one last point. One thing they might consider for the vice president is using one of these antibody drugs as a prophylaxis. There's a belief that these drugs would work well in that setting. There's some risks associated with that, but you obviously do not want the vice president to contract this infection.
Right, and he would have access to something like that, whereas you and I would not have access at this point. On the vaccine, I do want to quickly get you on this because Operation Warp Speed, the administration's effort, announced this week their timeline. They say by the end of 2020, all vulnerable people will be vaccinated. By the end of January, all seniors will be vaccinated. By March or April 2021, they should be able to vaccinate any American. And the head of this, Dr. Monsef Slaoui, said he's confident by June, everyone in the U.S. should be immunized. Is that realistic?
Well, I think it's aggressive. Look, this is first based on a presumption that these pivotal trials that are underway by Moderna and Pfizer actually read out and demonstrate that these vaccines are safe and effective. We all hope for that. We believe that's going to be the case based on the early data, but you don't know until you turn over the card on those trials. Assuming things go well, there is a chance that they could roll out this vaccine in time to get the elderly population in the United States vaccinated, the first dose of the vaccine. But remember, they need to now wait a month to get the second dose, and there's a period of time of a week or two until they have protective immunity from that vaccine. So you're looking really at 2021 until the vaccine really kicks in. In terms of the entire population, I think it's unrealistic to think that we're going to have a vaccine widely available for general distribution and authorized by the FDA for mass distribution until probably the second quarter of 2021, later on the second quarter.
Understood. Thank you, Dr. Gottlieb.